It's time for Herd Mentality, the weekly episode where you control what we talk about today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino from the Draft Network, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Happy Wednesday to you, and thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, or if you're joining us on the YouTube channel, your first watch every day. It's time for Herd Mentality. You know the drill. You send in the questions, comments, takes, and I respond to them here on the podcast. The best way for you to send in a Herd Mentality item is on Twitter. My handle is at the Joe Marino. Shoot me a DM. Let's get started. First one today comes from Justin. Justin says, I know it's draft season. First of all, Justin, it's always draft season. But we have a lot of extension candidates. And if you were Brandon Beane, what order of importance would you have? And would you let some of them walk? Ed Oliver, Tremaine Edmonds, Dawson Knox, Jordan Poyer. Would you give Gabe a contract extension before he breaks out and becomes more expensive? Would you even give Singletary an offer? It's a good question, Justin, and we'll talk more in depth about these things as we get closer to the season. But if I had to prioritize the extension candidates, I'd put them in this order. Ed Oliver first. I think he has developed very nicely, and I think there's another step for him to take and become a real difference maker at 3 technique, and I'm excited to see what he looks like with Von Miller on this defensive line, a deeper and better 1 technique situation, and for some of the young defensive ends to take a step. And so I'm very excited about him. He's young, top 10 pick. I'd like to continue working with him. Number 2 would be Dawson Knox. And the reason I would want to extend him early and potentially, my number 2 in the priority list is because the tight end market is really exploding. And I think you should trust that he's on a great trajectory. You should trust that he has great rapport with Josh Allen and get that deal done sooner rather than later. Now, the worst case scenario with Dawson Knox is you don't do anything and you franchise tag him. And if you do that, it's still a pretty modest deal. And so that's kind of what you can do to kick the can. But he's a guy that I would rather get done sooner rather than later. Number 3 is Jordan Poyer. I would like to do it this offseason if possible. Him and Micah Hyde have been the heart and soul of this Bills defense since 2017. I want to see both of those players finish their careers in Buffalo. Number 4 is Tremaine Edmonds. And it's a little bit of a tricky situation. I get a little bit concerned about having that much money invested in the linebacker position, considering what they're already paying Matt Milano and what I think Tremaine Edmonds is going to get. I'd love for Tremaine Edmonds to be back, but at some point you have to balance out this roster. So he would be 4th in my priority list, and you're exactly right. I would not offer Devin Singletary a contract extension. I would probably give him, I would ask him for 2 years, $6 million, something like that. He could take it or leave it, but I don't really believe in paying lucrative second contracts to running backs. There's not a lot of great success stories across the NFL when teams do that. So I'd be very modest with anything that I offered to Devin Singletary. As for Gabriel Davis, I wouldn't do anything right now, and I don't think you can until after they played in the league for 3 seasons anyways. But I would let that linger a little bit and see what type of production he actually delivers. He's had 2 good seasons. He had a lot of growth from year 1 to year 2, but I want to see more. I want the sample size to grow there before we start talking extension for Gabriel Davis. And again, he can't do anything until after the season anyway, so you'll gain enough information this year to have a good idea of what type of player he'll be in a more prominent role in the offense. Next one comes from Vin, who says, Joe, if the Bills were to trade up in the draft, would you hope that name on the card that Goodell reads is your top cornerback prospect or Jamison Williams? It's Williams for me. Also, how does it make you feel seeing the majority of mock drafts posted on Twitter use your mock draft machine. It must be a great sense of pride. Vin, I'll start there. Yes, it absolutely is. Being one of the founders of the Draft Network and to see what it's come to today and so many people using it, it's awesome. It's everything I ever dreamed it would become. And I'm excited for you guys to see what happens very, very soon with the draftnetwork.com and some of the plans we have for the very, very near future. So thanks to everyone who supports us over at TDN. And if you haven't checked out our mock draft simulator, come on over. It's a lot of fun. Now, as for if the Bills were to trade up, well, first of all, I don't think I'm hoping for that. I almost never love the idea of trading up in the first round unless you need a quarterback, and that's not the case with the Bills. And so my top cornerback prospect for the Bills is Sauce Gardner. My top wide receiver prospect for the Bills is Jameson Williams. If you have to trade up for Sauce, you're talking about getting into the top 10, and I don't think I'd be super crazy about that because it means you're giving up your first-round pick next year. I think it's a more palatable move up the board to get Jameson Williams, and so I think I would side with that just because you're talking about probably moving up to like 15, and you're probably not going to have to give up your first-round pick next year. You're probably parting with 57, though. So I'd probably just stay put, but because the move up the board would be less for my top receiver, I guess in your hypothetical here, I would hope it's for the receiver. Next one comes from Chris. This is a very thoughtful item that he put together. Pay attention. This is really good. Chris says, for herd mentality, I hope you will indulge me playing armchair offensive coordinator. I want to see some creative personnel packages next year with the addition of O.J. Howard. I think they have some exciting options. My dream is a package with 2 tight ends, Howard, Knox, and 3 receivers, Diggs, Davis, and McKenzie. With that, they could line them up in a tight formation with McKenzie in the backfield and Knox in the fullback spot, which would almost have a 21 personnel look, or split all 5 out wide. This way they can match up on the fly depending on what the defense rolls out. It seems like with those 2 tight ends that can both block and have speed and route running ability, the possibilities are endless. I feel like this is something I remember New England doing a lot when they had Gronk and Aaron Hernandez. Brady would just audible to spread them out or bring them in tight and hand it off. I feel like this isn't something teams are trying to do, but probably just because they don't have the horses. Am I overestimating the options that are available? Are there any new wrinkles or looks you want to see with Dorsey and the new personnel options? Appreciate your thoughts and love the podcast. Go Bills. Thank you, Chris. Love this. Love exactly what you outlined there. You could put 3 receivers, Diggs, McKenzie, and Davis, or Crowder. You could swap one of those guys out for Crowder. And then put Howard and Knox on the field, and you are going to be a problem, especially when Josh Allen's your quarterback and he adds not only the arm talent to access the entire field, but the ability to run. You're going to put a lot of stress on defenses with that personnel grouping. And I would hope that this is something that the Bills had in mind when they decided to make the moves they did this offseason. And so, yes, I love having them in tight sets. I love having them in spread sets, because if you put them in spread, you dictate so much to that defense, and you're going to put them in a bind because they're not going to have the right personnel to match up with that. They're either going to be too big and slow, or they're going to be too small, and there's going to be matchup issues because you can stress them with athletes like Knox and Howard at their size, and obviously a really great trio of receivers. Ken Dorsey's got to be chomping at the bit to get this stuff designed and get it rolling, because he's got a lot of fantastic options. So just to kind of add to what you outlined, which I think is phenomenal, you asked for a couple of the wrinkles that I want to see. And first of all, I would say 12 personnel is something I want to see at a 10, 15% clip, maybe 20%. I do want to see an identity running the football. I think part of the reason Brian Daboll couldn't get the run game going was because he had an identity crisis with the style of rushing offense he wanted to be. It would vary from gap heavy to zone heavy. And you have this mix match group of offensive linemen, some that translate best to a gap blocking scheme, some that translate best to a zone blocking scheme, and you're just left with this entire mixed bag. And so I want for Ken Dorsey and Aaron Cromer and Mike Shula to figure out, and Joe Brady, we'll put them all in there. We'll put it, Rob Boris, a lot of great offensive acumen in this coaching staff. I want them to get this figured out in terms of what type of rushing offense they want to be and perfect it, as opposed to being multiple, right? They had this fairy tale world where they thought they could be multiple with their run schemes, and it just didn't work. And so I'm excited to see them identify a true identity running the football. And then I want more routes that are designed for yards after catch. I want more cheap production in the passing game. I want more free access throws and opportunities for guys to produce after the catch. I think those are the three things that, as I evaluate Brian Daboll's offense and I project it forward and the things that they can do differently to make an elite offense more elite, those are the three things that I come up with at the top of my head. Shady Rays is an independent sunglasses company that gives you the features of $200 sunglasses for a fraction of the price. That means polarized lenses, well-constructed durable frames, and premium high-end finishes. Also, something you won't find anywhere else is Shady Rays' insane protection program. Shady Rays includes lost and broken protection on every pair. They will also send you a brand new pair if you lose them, no matter what happened. Give them a try, and if you don't love them, you'll pay nothing. It's as simple as that. Plus, 10 meals are donated to fight hunger in America when you shop with Shady Rays. Exclusively for our listeners, head to shadyrays.com and use code LOCKEDON to get 50% off 2 or more pairs of polarized sunglasses. That's code LOCKEDON for their best deal of the season, 50% off 2 or more pairs of Shady Rays sunglasses, backed by over 150,000 verified 5-star reviews. Let's keep it moving here. The next one comes from Doug, who says, there seems to be some great guards potentially available at pick 25, but like running back, that isn't a premium position. What is your philosophy on drafting a guard in the first round? Why is that different when it comes to running backs? Because decent guards seems as easy to find as good backs. See Ryan Bates and Ike Bacher. It's a really good question, Doug. I appreciate that. I love when people challenge things like this. And I am typically not a running back in the first round guy. I'm typically not a guard in the first round guy. Tight end, linebacker, safety. Ideally, you don't pick those positions in the first round, but I do come short of saying I would never do it. Because to me, it's appropriate to take a player at any position where you have them graded relative to the class. So there are times when I do have a first round grade on a running back or a guard or a center or a tight end or a linebacker or a safety. And if you get a first round grade from me, then you're worth a first round pick. And so I want to put aside those rules that say I won't pick a position in the first round and further define it by I will only pick guys that I have graded in the first round regardless of position. Now, I will say it's more difficult for a non-premium position to get a first round grade from me. But if they do, then I think they are worth it. So for this year in particular, I do not have a first round grade on any running backs, and therefore I do not support the idea of picking a running back in the first round. Now, as for guards, I do have a first round grade on a couple of guards, and that they are Zion Johnson and Kenyon Green. And from a Bills specific angle, I would put Tyler Smith into that category. Now, the reason I would be more open to a guard in the first round as compared to a running back is because I think guards play a more important role on every down. They're on the field every single play. They maintain the depth of the pocket on passing downs. They create running lanes on run downs. If your guard screws up, it doesn't matter who your running back is, they're not going to be able to produce. And so I feel like guards are less dependent on the players around them as opposed to a running back. But you are very correct in that the NFL is littered with quality mid-round starting interior offensive linemen. And so there is a very good value question to be asked here. But in general, it's about where I grade you. And there are times that I have players at non-premium positions with a first-round grade. And if I do, I think it's appropriate to pick them in the first round. This year in particular, I don't have a running back that has a first-round grade, but I have a couple of interior offensive linemen. And so that's kind of how I look at it. Next one today comes from Chase. Chase says, my question refers to two of my favorite day two wide receiver prospects. If drafted by the Buffalo Bills, how would you like to see Calvin Austin III from Memphis or Christian Watson out of North Dakota State deployed in our offense? What would be some key differences in their respective usages, factoring size, route running ability, and other nuances? Now, these are really interesting players to contrast because I think they're very different players. Obviously, you have a height, weight, speed guy in Christian Watson, and you have a Smurf in Calvin Austin, right? 5'7", 170 pounds. So just because of their body composition, they offer very different things. Now, Calvin Austin, if he were drafted by the Bills, I would want to see him immediately take all the things that Isaiah McKenzie does from a gadget perspective. But I think Calvin Austin is a much better route runner. And so I think he can uncover more effectively from man coverage. I think he's better after the catch, and I think he's got a more complete vertical receiving skill set due to his route running, ball skills, hands, and release package. I think he stacks corners and creates leverage better than Isaiah McKenzie. And so I would have him doing those things, plus I'd immediately make him my starting punt returner. For Christian Watson, I think he's more of an outside player that is a size, ball skills guy down the field. But the interesting thing with Christian Watson is this guy's an explosive play machine as well. And he gives you a ton of speed, but he also gives you some physicality to go with it. And his resume of explosive plays at college is off the charts. And so he's more of an on the line of scrimmage type player, vertical shot guy, where Calvin Austin almost gives you a little bit more in terms of how he can attack the field in multiple ways. But I think Christian Watson is a guy that I trust a little bit more if corners want to be physical, right? He's got the skill, he's got the size and skill set that translates better to playing on the line of scrimmage in the NFL. Now, Calvin Austin is probably a little bit more effective of a quick game guy. You can ask him to uncover quickly, where Christian Watson is more of a established leverage on glance routes and those types of things. So they're very different players. Both are explosive. Both offer a lot of speed, but they come in a lot different packages. Another question from Chase is an interesting one, and hopefully I don't get yelled at for answering this, but he said, what are your top 5 wing spots in Buffalo? So a little bit of a story here. First of all, I love chicken wings. They're my favorite food in the world. There's no question about that. Steak's close. Steak's a very close second, but chicken wings. So I grew up in Western New York. I was born in Grand Island. I lived there for like 11 years until I turned 11 years old. And then my family moved to Charlotte, North Carolina. And of course, I'm 11 years old. I came with them. Now, we used to visit all the time growing up, but I stopped visiting in 2010 when my mom moved to Buffalo. And so I went this long period of time from 2010 to 2021 where I really didn't go to Buffalo at all. Like my first trip since 2020 was last year, and I came twice. I went to 2 games, Houston game and the Carolina game. And so I'm a little unfamiliar with the wing scene in Western New York because I had that big gap where I just wasn't there. Now, I can tell you that I ate a lot of chicken wings in the 2 times that I was there this past year. And so I can't give you a top 5 because there are a couple places that are just not worth ranking that I did not enjoy at all. But I do have a very clear top 3 based on what I've tried. I have a very clear number 1, Bar Bill. Bar Bill has perfected how to make a chicken wing. The blue cheese is phenomenal, and they have a variety of flavors that are ridiculously good. Cream of the crop, Number 1 overall grade in every single draft. Number 2 is Lenovo's. I don't know if that's a hot take. I don't know if people like Lenovo's. I do. I think it's wonderful. Blue cheese is great. Size of the wings is phenomenal. They taste great. The pizza is wonderful. I love Lenovo's. And number 3, little hole in the wall for you here in North Tonawanda, Klimex Tavern. Phenomenal wings. Great prices as well. That you can get some very inexpensive beverages there. And their wings are really good as well. So number 1 is Bar Bill. 2 is Lenovo's. 3 is Klimex Tavern. I have a lot I need to try. So hit me up with your recommendations for my next trip. And I'm coming a lot this year. I'm coming for camp. And I'm coming for probably, I would guess, 2 or 3 games. So I'll be in the area quite a bit starting late this summer into the fall. Next one comes from Tony, who says, could you position Gregory Rousseau on where you would place him amongst this year's edge class, given how young he is? I love this question. So I think it's a phenomenal class of edge players, but I would slot Rousseau this year as edge 5. Ahead of him, I would have Aiden Hutchinson from Michigan, Kayvon Thibodeau from Oregon, Jermaine Johnson from Florida State, and Trayvon Walker from Georgia. Those 4 players would be ahead of him. Then I'd put Rousseau, and then we start talking about like Boye Mafe and George Karlaftis. So he'd be edge 5 in this class for me. Next one comes from Tommy, who says, for the podcast, can you evaluate the running backs in this year's draft and compare them to past years? I would love to get your rankings on Breece Hall, Kenneth Walker, and Isaiah Spiller in comparison to past prospects such as Travis Etienne, Najee Harris, Javonte Williams, DeAndre Swift, John Taylor, etc., in regards to draft grades coming out. Awesome question. I love this. And one thing that I do is I grade all players on the same scale every single year. And so I can answer this question every single time. So combining the last 3 draft classes this year, 2021 and 2020, and giving you the list of the players to where I can fit in Isaiah Spiller, Breece Hall, and Kenneth Walker, this is how I have them graded, and these are the number grades. So my number 1 back of the last 3 years is J.K. Dobbins. He's with the Baltimore Ravens. He had a grade of a 90. My number 2 running back in the last 3 years, Jonathan Taylor with the Colts. He had a grade of a 88.5. Number 3 is Clyde Edwards-Helaire, 87.5. DeAndre Swift, number 4, 87.5. Number 5, Cam Akers, 86.5. Number 6, Travis Etienne, 84. Number 7, Isaiah Spiller, 83.5. So that's a this year guy. Number 7 in the last 3 years. Number 8, Najee Harris, 83 on the dot. Number 9, Javonte Williams, 83 on the dot. Number 10, Kenneth Walker, 82.5. Number 11, Antonio Gibson, 82. Number 12, Michael Carter, 79.5. And then number 13 is Breece Hall at a 77.5. So Isaiah Spiller would be RB7 in the last 3 years. Kenneth Walker, RB10, and Breece Hall, RB13. We talk about Built Bars all the time in this podcast, the world's best tasting protein bars, but have you tried the Puffs? If you haven't, then you're missing out on one of Built Bar's best tasting bars. Puffs are the first ever protein-infused marshmallow. They're fluffy, they're marshmallowy, they're not just a protein bar. They're a treat, and they're covered in 100% real chocolate because all Built Bars are covered in 100% real chocolate, and they're healthy. Most Built Bars contain 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein. And they have a ton of great flavors: mint brownie, coconut, raspberry, coconut almond, tons more, and new flavors are coming out all the time. So check out Built.com often to see what's new. At Built, it's all about taste. They make it taste great first, and then they figure out how to make it healthy. And I don't know how they do it, but they pull it off every single time. Got a deal for you. Go to Built.com. Use our promo code LOCKED15. You'll get 15% off your next order. Again, that's promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. The next one comes from Nathan. Nathan says, last year you were high on Dawson Knox, having a breakout year and taking a big jump. My question is, who is the next Knox of our recent draft picks? Anyone you are predicting to have a big jump in production that's on a rookie deal? Yes, I do. It's Spencer Brown at right tackle. Talked a lot about Spencer Brown in this podcast. First of all, he's the best athlete on the team. He's one of the best athletes in the NFL. He is insane in terms of size and athleticism. Number two, I just love that he had the year that he did last year. And I know that there was plenty of ups and downs, but the fact that he got that playing time is huge. That's going to set him up very, very well to take a step and improve and be a major factor for this offensive line. So I love that. I love that he's going to be playing for Aaron Kromer as the offensive line coach, who has an off-the-charts resume of developing offensive line talent. And I've had a conversation with Aaron Kromer about Spencer Brown, and he's very excited to work with him. And he told me about some very practical things that he's going to work with Spencer Brown on that's going to set him up to take a big-time step this year. So, to me, when I read this question, Spencer Brown's name went off in my head like there were sirens going off. Expecting big things from Spencer Brown this year. And remember, didn't play football in 2020. And he only has 2 seasons of his life before the NFL playing offensive line. He was a tight end in 8-man high school football and then only had 2 seasons of game experience at Northern Iowa. He's going to take a big-time jump this year. He has the makings of a big-time star offensive tackle. Scottish Bill says, Joe, I'm sold on going cornerback in round 1, and that's our obvious need. But in round 2, what's your opinion on grabbing Calvin Austin III with our pick, or even going up the board in round 2 to get him? That elite speed is something Bean would covet, and I like his route running as well. Look, I think you're onto the right idea here in that I think if Brandon Bean has guys that he wants outside of the first round, that he should go get them. I do support that. And if Calvin Austin is the vertical threat, the yards after catch threat, the punt returner, he answers all 3 of those things, you can make a strong case that this is a target the Bills should go after in the second round. And so I talked about him a little bit already in this podcast, but I do think Calvin Austin would be a nice fit because of what he offers is very much what the Bills' weaponry is missing. Next one comes from Scarecrow Boat, who says, who is your pick him no matter what player for the Bills in each of the first 3 rounds? So the player you would select in that round, no matter what, that you feel has a realistic chance of being available at that spot. Love this question. And these are all realistic options. In the first round, Jamison Williams, wide receiver, Alabama, no matter what. In the second round, Dylan Parham, offensive lineman from Memphis, no matter what. Number 3, in terms of third round, Cam Taylor-Britt, corner from Nebraska, no matter what. I think those would be slam dunk players to add at positions of need for the Buffalo Bills. Next one today comes from Skip, who says, are there certain positions that are more difficult to evaluate than others? If so, please list them in order of difficulty. I really like this question, but I do fall short of actually answering it by saying any one position is harder to evaluate than others. Because I think I have plenty of hits and misses at all the positions. This is what I'll say. What makes scouting players the most difficult is the human element. First of all, making predictions about the future is hard, right? In general. Now you're forecasting how a human being is going to operate in a completely new environment where their performance is contingent on the environment. You also have no idea how human beings are going to respond to being in their early 20s, becoming an instant millionaire, and having more free time than they ever have in their entire life. You just have no idea how that's going to go, especially if you don't have the same access to players as teams do, which, hello, that's me, right? I get to meet a lot of players. I get to spend time with a lot of players. That definitely happens. But never to the level where I can put them on the whiteboard and put them through interviews and bring them into my environment and really get a feel for them as human beings. And so that makes things very, very challenging. Now, I think I do a good job of watching tape, researching players, gaining all the information that I can, and formulating evaluations and projections for every player. But there are missing data points that I don't get because I don't get the same time with every single player. So the human element and not knowing how guys are going to respond, like I said, being in their early 20s, becoming an instant millionaire, and having more free time than they ever had in a city that they probably never lived in. That's what makes it difficult. The human element. And like I said, like the environment. And those environments change. Look at Justin Fields with the Chicago Bears. This team trades multiple first-round picks to go get him to be their franchise quarterback. Within a season, his head coach is gone. They're tearing things down. He has no offensive line, no receivers. Like how they're setting him up to fail. They're busting him right now. Look at Mac Jones with the New England Patriots. For as good of a landing spot as we thought that was, Josh McDaniels is gone. They lost their offensive coordinator, and Bill Belichick / Joe Judge / Matt Patricia is going to replace him. They lost their best offensive lineman in Shaq Mason. They've added no meaningful help for him at the wide receiver position. I'm sorry. I don't think Devontae Parker is going to move the needle. Ty Montgomery? Things change. Context and scenario changes, and that affects performance. So the human element and the inevitable changes that come in the NFL, that's what makes scouting players difficult. All right, folks, that's going to do it for us here today on the podcast. I certainly hope you enjoyed. Tomorrow, we're going to talk about some things I didn't expect to talk about from a draft lens, and that's linebackers, and that's safeties, because some things have happened here that lead me to believe that we need to talk about some of the early round possibilities for the Buffalo Bills at linebacker and safety. And so we're going to do a primer on those positions tomorrow. So don't miss it. Make sure you're subscribed. We'd love it if you took a second to rate, review, and share the podcast. Have a great rest of your day, and I look forward to catching up with you again tomorrow.